Well, it's time now for perspective, pulling from jazz, soul, rock and romanticism to create an alternative, sometimes experimental, often poetic and always original sound. That is Jazz Ireland's take on the music of Liv Monaghan, a singer, songwriter and costume designer from the Emerald Isle. Living and working, though, in France since 2012, her latest album, Slow Exhale, was released at the end of last year, and she joins us now to give us her perspective on the world of jazz today and what it's like to be a jazz musician in a city so renowned for that genre. Liv Monaghan, thanks for your time. Before we get down to the process, let's indulge in a quick snippet from one of your latest songs.
What becomes of us when our hearts fall to earthly dust? When our night's minds let us dive through galaxies and nothingness to
Now, Liv, listening there to the lyrics, and you sing about when our minds go to nothingness, but hard to imagine your mind ever does that. Reading reviews often said you're very original. I mean, where does your jazz come from?
Well, I suppose I'm really inspired by my surroundings, and there's so much jazz in Paris. I guess that's where it comes from. I'm Irish as well, so there's a lot of the sort of Irish poetry in those lyrics that you've pulled there, and yeah.
But indeed, Paris, so incredibly steeped in jazz history, you know, so many of the greats came and performed here. Does that not, in a way, add a certain pressure? You know, Paris, very beautiful city, so I can see the inspiring side, but, you know, in a way, is there something?
Absolutely, there is loads of pressure, of course, but I mean, I'm coming from a very different angle because I'm Irish and there aren't a whole lot of us here making this kind of improvisational music in Paris, so that gives a little bit of an edge. So of course, I'm always, you know, looking at the greats who've been before and thinking, wow, you know, I'm not putting myself in the same boat as them, but I think I'm bringing something a little bit different as well.
And how do you, because that seems to me to be the hardest thing with anything creative, is to find that originality. How do you steer away from what you obviously love as well?
I think it's really important to be honest, and I don't strive to be original, you know, it's not something I'm sitting at my piano thinking I must be original. It's just something that comes and from being really honest and allowing myself to just go with whatever comes at that time, and of course taking in, I suppose, those influences that would have come from Ireland, and obviously it's going to be a little bit different when I'm mixing it with the things that I'm encountering here and the musicians I work with who come from totally different backgrounds. So
indeed, yeah, using what you have in you that makes you an individual and different from everybody else. Listening to your album Slow Exhale, it would appear that the words are almost as important as the sound, as the melody that you put. Would you accept that? And if that's the case, which comes first in a way, the music or the notes?
Absolutely, for me it's the music actually that comes first, and I don't write the two together. So it's funny, for me the music is a little bit more important in that it comes first and it influences the subject matter. But of course both are really important for me. I think the Irish side, you know, kind of hinges a lot on the, you know, the lyrics and the poetic side. But for me it's really about the sound. That's the thing that comes
quite
first.
an original, a wide range in that sound. Now, one thing at your gigs, you can often be seen with an old-fashioned click typewriter, typing away and handing out, you know, little notes on receipts or scraps of paper to people. What's that about?
Well, I sort of like to include people in the creative process, so I hand out people, you know, their receipts and metro tickets. So actually, if you're really perceptive, you'll find out probably a lot about me from the things that I'm handing out during the performances. And the typewriter I just really like. It's kind of a percussive thing, and sometimes I also write my poetry or my lyrics on the typewriter, so it's sort of, I love to bring that in as well to show people, you know, how the process.
There's a rhythm to it as well. That's quite interesting.
Absolutely.
Looking at the video playing behind you a few moments ago, I think we showed a little clip of another one, Feathers, and in that we see, you know, a box of trinkets, and it does appear that in many ways you like old things, you're inspired by old things, you know, they've even inspired certain songs. Tell me a bit more about that, and, you know, what is this link to old vintage things, and where does it come from?
Well, I love old things. I suppose you mentioned at the start that I'm a costume designer as well, so I do a lot less of that now, must be said, but I'm really inspired by old pieces and vintage clothes, and I love the stories that they tell. So I actually wrote a song on the record called Dead Lady Cigarettes, which is inspired by an old cigarette case that I found in a Parisian flea market. So that for me is just, you know, that's so inspiring. I love these things and thinking of, you know, who had them before and what sort of stories they had, and if they could talk, what sort of stories they would tell. You know, I think that's really beautiful.
Indeed, opening the door to that imagination. But you did mention that you also have that costume design background, and you know, there's poetry in words, there's poetry in your music for sure, but you also find a poetry in everything visual around us, even in what people wear.
Yes, I love what people wear. I think it's so revealing, you know, and I know
even here in Paris, because I find we're quite conservative.
Yes, that's true. I think there is definitely a conservative element to the way of dressing here, for sure. Even myself, you know, my own dress sense has, you know, changed a little since I moved here. But you know, there's that in itself is very poetic, and you know, I find it's very funny to think how much we're shaped by what we wear, how much we give away about ourselves, or try not to by what we wear, you know, and I think that can be, you know,
yes, it's like your music and the words. It's that identity that's constantly fleeting and changing, which is of interest. Now, of course, you live here in Paris, and one thing that's been hitting the news lately, Paris, again, we were saying such a hive of jazz activity, but a lot of Paris was known for these cafe concerts that were around. And in the news lately, they seem to be closing down a lot of the small cafes, a lot of the basement settings, due to regulations, safety regulations. What's it like being an artist in Paris? You know, has it got more difficult? Is it easy to make a living off it?
It can be challenging, you know, that's absolutely true. And you're right with a lot of the safety regulations, which of course must be adhered to. A lot of the basement little clubs and cafes have been closed. That does make it very, very challenging. I think there's always a way around things. You can find, you know, people are creative all the time, and people are finding ways to, you know, overcome situations. I mean, what's becoming very popular now are private house parties in France in general, and especially in Paris. So a lot of musicians are actually earning their bread and butter this way, which I think is a really interesting, you know, it's a really interesting thing. It's kind of going back to the old-fashioned salon days, you know, where people, so I've been a birthday present and whatnot for lots of people, which is, you know,
I absolutely love that idea, I have to say, Liv Monaghan. Well, thanks so much for coming in and giving us an insight into your creativity. We're going to, I know you're heading off you have gigs here in Paris and heading off on a tour in northern France, in Brittany next month. Let's take another short snippet of Liv Monaghan's work.
Home is where the heart is. Home is where the heart beats. Little bird, little wing, little feathery thing. Wahoo,